Unlock the door to mystery with one very short story. The micro-podcast filled with morally complex characters, twists you won't predict, and endings you won't forget. Every episode is a brief, intense journey, perfect for listeners who crave mystery, intrigue, and stories that leave you thinking long after the tale ends. Today's episode begins now. You ever wonder, if you had diplomatic immunity, could you get away with murder? I did, and so naturally I looked it up. Turns out, the answer is, kinda. Under the Vienna Convention, diplomats can't be touched by the host country. No arrests, no trials, nothing, even if the crime is murder. But there's always a but. The home country can yank that shield away. They can prosecute you themselves, or just let you slip out the back door on the next flight home. So the truth is, yeah, you might walk free, or you might be paraded back to your own soil for judgment. Either way, the message is clear. Immunity doesn't mean innocence. Think about that while listening to today's episode. The diplomatic pouch. Some secrets travel first class, others hide in diplomatic pouches. Ray Castellanos learned that lesson at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, standing in the customs hall at 3 a.m., staring at a shipping manifest that read like a death certificate. 22 years with CBP. 22 years of checking passports, searching luggage, and waving through the endless parade of travelers who thought Atlanta was just another stop on their way to somewhere better. Ray knew better. Atlanta was where things ended, where stories died, where the truth got buried under paperwork and protocol. The diplomatic pouch sat on his inspection table like a black tumor, heavy, sealed, marked with the official stamps of the Consulate of Moldavia, a country most people couldn't find on a map and Ray couldn't spell without looking it up. But he didn't need to spell it. He just needed to wave it through. That was the rule. Diplomatic pouches were inviolable, sacred, protected by international law and treaties older than his career. You didn't open them. You didn't question them. You didn't even look at them too hard. You just stamped the paperwork and pretended you didn't smell the rot. Ray had been smelling it for months. The first pouch had arrived in February. Same consulate, same courier, a thin man with dead eyes and a diplomatic passport that looked fresh from the printer. Viktor Petrov, cultural attaché. The kind of title that meant nothing and covered everything. Ray had processed it like any other diplomatic shipment, checked the seals, verified the documentation, watched Petrov load it into a black sedan with diplomatic plates and drive into the Atlanta night. 3 days later, the news reported a missing person, Sarah Chen, 24. Art student at Savannah College of Art and Design. Last seen leaving her apartment in Virginia Highland. The kind of story that filled the local news for a week before disappearing into the statistical void of urban crime. Ray might not have connected it if not for the smell. That sweet, cloying stench that clung to the pouch like perfume on a corpse. The smell of something dying, something dead. Something that shouldn't be traveling in a diplomatic container marked cultural materials. But diplomatic pouches were inviolable. Ray stamped the paperwork and tried to forget. The second pouch arrived in March. Same courier, same smell. Same dead eyes that looked through Ray like he was furniture. This time, Ray paid attention. He memorized the shipping details. The weight, 47 pounds. The dimensions, 36 by 18 by 12 inches. The exact size of a body bag if you folded it right. The documentation listed the contents as historical artifacts and cultural documents. The kind of vague description that could cover anything from ancient pottery to fresh corpses. Ray went home that night and did something he'd never done in 22 years of government service. He researched. The internet was full of missing persons reports. Atlanta PD's database read like a horror novel written by bureaucrats. Names, ages, last known locations. Most of them young women. Most of them disappeared without a trace. But some had patterns. Jennifer Walsh, 26, marketing coordinator. Disappeared March 15th, 2 days after the second pouch cleared customs. Last seen at a coffee shop in Little 5 Points, talking to a man with an accent. Ray cross-referenced the dates. Every pouch arrival matched a disappearance within 72 hours. The timing was too precise to be coincidence, too consistent to be random. He was looking at a shipping schedule for human trafficking, or worse. The third pouch arrived in April. Ray was ready. He'd spent weeks studying diplomatic protocols, international law, customs regulations, looking for loopholes, exceptions. Some legal way to inspect a diplomatic container without starting an international incident. There wasn't one. Diplomatic pouches were protected by the Vienna Convention, Article 27, Paragraph 3. The diplomatic bag shall not be opened or detained, clear as daylight, absolute as death. But Ray had been a customs agent for 2 decades. He knew how to read between the lines of bureaucratic crap. He knew the difference between legal and right. And he knew that sometimes the law was just another word for cowardice. Viktor Petrov arrived at the usual time, 3 a.m. The dead hour when the airport felt like a morgue and the fluorescent lights hummed like flies over roadkill. He wheeled the pouch through customs with the casual indifference of a man who knew he was untouchable. Cultural materials, he said in that flat, emotionless voice. His English was perfect, but it sounded like he'd learned it from a textbook written by sociopaths. Ray looked at the documentation. Same stamps, same seals, same lies wrapped in diplomatic immunity. Heavy shipment this time, Ray said, testing the waters. Petrov's smile was thin as a razor blade. History weighs more than you think, Mr. Castellanos. Ray felt something cold crawl up his spine. Petrov knew his name, had probably known it for months, had probably been watching him, studying him, measuring him for a coffin. I'm sure it does, Ray replied, stamping the paperwork with hands that didn't shake. Not yet. Petrov loaded the pouch into his sedan and disappeared into the Atlanta night. Ray watched the taillights fade and wondered if he was watching a killer drive away. Again. The next morning, the news reported another disappearance. Maria Santos, 23, nursing student at Emory, last seen leaving her shift at Grady Hospital. Ray sat in his apartment in Decatur, drinking coffee that tasted like ashes and staring at a map of Atlanta covered in red pins. Each pin marked a disappearance. Each disappearance connected to a diplomatic pouch. The pattern was clear. The evidence was circumstantial. The law was absolute. And Ray was running out of time to decide which side of history he wanted to be on. Ray tried the official channels first. That was his mistake. He filed a report with his supervisor, Agent Patricia Morse, 20-year veteran, by-the-book bureaucrat who'd climbed the CBP ladder by never asking uncomfortable questions and always following orders. "Diplomatic pouches are inviolable, Castellanos," she said, not looking up from her computer screen. "You know that. I know that. The Vienna Convention knows that. Case closed. But the pattern?" "What pattern?" "You've got coincidences and conspiracy theories. That's not evidence. That's paranoia." Ray spread the missing persons reports across her desk like tarot cards predicting disaster. 7 women, 7 pouches, 7 perfect matches in timing and location. Morse glanced at the papers with the enthusiasm of someone reading a tax code. "Correlation isn't causation. You should know that by now." "Then let me contact Atlanta PD. Let them investigate." "You'll do no such thing." Morse's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of saying no. "CBP doesn't interfere with diplomatic relations based on hunches. We follow protocol. We respect international law. We don't create incidents." Ray felt the walls closing in. The system that had protected him for 22 years was now protecting a killer. The same rules that kept him employed were keeping women dead. "What if I'm right?" "Then you're right about something that's none of our business." Morse finally looked at him, and Ray saw something in her eyes that chilled him more than Petrov's dead stare. Indifference. The kind of bureaucratic apathy that let atrocities happen while good people filled out forms and followed procedures. 7 women, Patricia. 7 foreign nationals who aren't our responsibility. Our job is customs enforcement, not playing detective. Drop it, Ray. That's an order. Ray dropped it for about 12 hours. Then he called Atlanta PD directly. Detective Lisa Park listened to his story with the patience of someone who'd heard every conspiracy theory the city had to offer. She took notes, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested in the connections Ray had mapped out. "It's thin," she admitted, "but it's not nothing. Problem is, diplomatic immunity is a federal issue. Local PD can't touch it without federal cooperation. So what do I do?" "You could try the FBI. International trafficking falls under their jurisdiction." Ray tried the FBI. Special Agent Marcus Webb listened to his story with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to investigate UFO sightings. He was polite, professional, completely uninterested. "Mr. Castellanos, diplomatic pouches are protected by international treaty. Even if we wanted to investigate, which we don't, based on the evidence you've presented, we'd need State Department approval. And State doesn't approve investigations that could damage diplomatic relations over unsubstantiated allegations." Unsubstantiated. "I've got 7 missing women and 7 diplomatic shipments. You've got coincidences. Timing isn't evidence. Suspicion isn't proof. And diplomatic immunity isn't negotiable." Ray walked out of the FBI field office feeling like he'd been punched in the gut by the Constitution. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, protecting the powerful, ignoring the powerless, letting killers hide behind legal technicalities while their victims rotted in unmarked graves. The 4th pouch arrived in May. Ray stood in the customs hall, watching Viktor Petrov wheel death through the checkpoint with the casual indifference of a man delivering office supplies. The documentation was perfect. The seals were intact. The smell was stronger. "Cultural materials," Petrov said, as if it were a private joke between them. Ray stamped the paperwork and watched another killer walk free. Because the law said so. Because protocol demanded it. because the system valued diplomatic relations more than human lives. That night, he sat in his apartment and stared at the news report about the latest disappearance. Ashley Moore, 25, teacher at an elementary school in Buckhead, engaged to be married. The kind of person who made the world a little brighter just by existing. Now she was cargo in a diplomatic pouch, traveling to God knew where for God knew what purpose. Ray poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and tried to wash away the taste of complicity. It didn't work. Nothing worked. The system had made him an accessory to murder, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Except there was. The thought came to him like a whisper from hell. Software seductive. Dangerous. He couldn't stop the pouches from leaving, but he could follow them. Ray called in sick the next day. First time in 5 years. He spent the morning at a pawn shop in East Atlanta, buying equipment he'd never thought he'd need. Night vision scope. Digital camera with telephoto lens. GPS tracker the size of a quarter. The tools of a stalker, or a man trying to save lives. The 5th pouch was scheduled for June 3rd. Ray knew because he'd memorized Petrov's shipping schedule. Every 6 weeks. Regular as clockwork. Efficient as death. Ray arrived at the airport 2 hours early, parked in the employee lot, and waited. He'd traded shifts with Martinez, told him he had a family emergency. Not entirely a lie. The human family was having an emergency, and Ray was the only one who seemed to give a damn. Petrov arrived at 2:47 a.m. Same black sedan, same diplomatic plates, same dead eyes that reflected the terminal lights like a shark's. Ray watched from the shadows as Petrov wheeled the pouch through customs. Watched Martinez stamp the paperwork and wave through another shipment of human misery. Watched a killer walk free because the law said he could. Then Ray followed him. The sedan headed north on I-85, past the airport, past the city limits, into the kind of industrial wasteland where Atlanta kept its dirty secrets. Warehouses, storage facilities, the kind of places where screams got swallowed by concrete and steel. Ray stayed 3 cars back, his hands sweating on the steering wheel. He'd never tailed anyone before, never played detective, never broken the law in service of something higher than protocol. It felt like falling. The sedan turned into a complex of storage units off Buford Highway. Ray parked across the street and watched through his telephoto lens as Petrov backed up to Unit 247. The roll-up door opened, revealing darkness deeper than the night. 2 men emerged from the shadows. Ray didn't recognize them, but he recognized the type. Eastern European, military bearing, the kind of men who solved problems with violence and buried the evidence in shallow graves. They unloaded the pouch with the casual efficiency of movers handling furniture. Ray snapped photos, documented everything, built a case that would never see the inside of a courtroom. The pouch disappeared into the storage unit. The men disappeared into the night. Petrov drove away, his job done until the next shipment arrived. Ray sat in his car until dawn, watching the storage facility like it might explode. Nothing happened. Nothing moved. The dead stayed dead, and the living pretended not to notice. He drove home and transferred the photos from the camera's memory card to his laptop. The images were grainy but clear enough. Petrov, the sedan, the license plate, the storage unit number, evidence that proved nothing and changed less. Ray tried one more time with the authorities, took his photos to Detective Park, showed her the storage facility, laid out the timeline with the precision of a man building his own coffin. "It's compelling," she admitted, "but it's still not enough for a warrant." We'd need probable cause, and suspicion isn't probable cause, even with the photos. So we just let it continue. We follow the law, Mr. Castellanos, even when the law protects the wrong people. Ray understood then. The system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. Built to protect the powerful and sacrifice the powerless. Constructed to let atrocities happen as long as they happened quietly, legally, with proper documentation and diplomatic immunity. The sixth pouch arrived in July. Ray processed it like all the others, stamped the paperwork, waved through the killer, watched another woman disappear into the statistical void of urban crime. But this time was different. This time, Ray had planted the GPS tracker. He'd practiced for weeks, perfecting the technique. A magnetic device the size of a quarter, attached to the underside of the pouch during the inspection process. Invisible, undetectable, illegal as hell. Ray tracked the signal on his phone as Petrov drove to the storage facility, watched the dot stop at Unit 247, waited for the handoff to be completed. Then he did something that would have gotten him fired, arrested, and possibly killed. He called the news. Channel 2 Action News. The kind of local station that loved a good scandal and didn't ask too many questions about sources. Ray fed them the story piece by piece. Anonymous tips, leaked documents, photos taken from public property. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Diplomatic immunity scandal. Are foreign consulates smuggling human remains? The kind of sensational headline that sold advertising and destroyed careers. The reporter was young, ambitious, hungry for the kind of story that won awards and launched careers. She didn't care about diplomatic immunity or international law. She cared about ratings and Pulitzer Prizes. The story went viral by noon. By evening, Ray's body was discovered in his apartment. Apparent suicide, according to the initial police report. Single gunshot to the head. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of struggle. The kind of clean, professional death that happened when people asked too many questions about the wrong subjects. The news story died with him. Channel 2 Action News issued a retraction within hours. Unsubstantiated allegations. Unreliable source. Regrettable lapse in journalistic standards. The kind of corporate backpedaling that happened when lawyers made phone calls and advertising revenue was threatened. The reporter who'd broken the story was reassigned to covering high school football games and county fair pie contests. Her career in investigative journalism ended before it began. The kind of professional death that served as a warning to others who might be tempted to dig too deep. The storage facility on Buford Highway was cleaned out overnight, empty as a tomb by morning. The kind of efficient operation that happened when people with diplomatic immunity needed problems to disappear. Viktor Petrov vanished from Atlanta, recalled to Moldavia for cultural reassignment, according to official sources. The kind of bureaucratic shuffle that made inconvenient people disappear without raising uncomfortable questions. The Consulate of Moldavia issued a statement expressing condolences for Ray's tragic death and denying any connection to the baseless allegations made by a disturbed individual. The kind of diplomatic language that sounded sympathetic while twisting the knife. Ray's funeral was small. A few co-workers from CBP, his ex-wife, a handful of neighbors who barely knew his name. The kind of quiet ceremony that happened when heroes died alone and unrecognized. Agent Patricia Morse gave a brief eulogy about Ray's dedicated service and unfortunate mental health struggles. She didn't mention the missing women, didn't mention the diplomatic pouches, didn't mention that Ray had died trying to save lives while the system he served protected killers. The missing persons cases remained open, unsolved. The kind of statistical footnotes that filled police databases and broke families' hearts. Sarah Chen, Jennifer Walsh, Maria Santos, Ashley Moore. Names that became numbers. Lives that became paperwork. The diplomatic pouches resumed their schedule within a month. Different route, different airport, different customs agent who would stamp the paperwork and wave through the killers because the law said they had to. The system had learned from Ray's mistake, adapted, evolved, become more careful about covering its tracks and silencing whistleblowers. But it hadn't stopped killing. Somewhere in America, another customs agent was processing another diplomatic pouch, smelling the rot, seeing the pattern, wondering if they had the courage to speak up. Most wouldn't. Most would stamp the paperwork and look the other way. Most would choose career security over moral certainty. The smart ones would remember what happened to Ray Castellanos, the man who tried to save lives and died for his trouble. The man who discovered that some borders were meant to be crossed and others were meant to keep the truth buried. Truth was, some secrets traveled first class. Others traveled in body bags marked cultural materials. And the system that was supposed to protect the innocent had become the very thing that destroyed them. Thanks for listening to one very short story. If today's story hooked you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us grow and keeps the suspense coming your way. Want to dive deeper? Check out the podcast description to learn more about the show and explore special offers from our sponsor. Until next time, keep dodging bullets and stay safe in the shadows.